Praises rising, eyes are turning to you. We turn to you. Hope is stirring, hearts are yearning for you. We long for you. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. In your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come have your way among us. Welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Sing that again. Praises rising. Praises rising, eyes are turning to you. We turn to you. Hope is stirring, hearts are yearning for you. We long for you. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. In your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come have your way among us. Welcome you here, Lord Jesus. Hear the sound of hearts returning to you. We turn to you. In your kingdom, broken lives are made new. You make us new. When we see you, we find strength to face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come have your way among us. Welcome you here, Lord Jesus. 'Cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away. 'Cause when we see you, 'cause when we see you, we find strength to face the day. And in your presence, all our fears are washed away, washed away. Hosanna, Hosanna, you are the God who saves us, worthy of all our praises. Hosanna, Hosanna, come have your way as we join the heavens in worshiping you this morning, Lord. May we meet with you. May we know you close to us. Will bow down, and every chain will break, as broken hearts declare His praise. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him.
Moving in our midst, I worship
worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you. Yes, you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Yes, you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Yes, that is who you are. 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 I just feel that God's saying this morning that there's some of us here that really don't feel that God's working, that maybe don't see that God's working, but
He never stops. And I just think that, I'd like us to sing this bridge and maybe use that as a prayer, even if maybe you're not feeling it at the moment, to still declare it, that you never stop working. And just sing that.
Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
Just voices, let's declare that.
You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
Amen.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord.
Let's sing that again.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness. You give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are
sense the presence of the Lord is with us now. I don't want to rush off to do the talk or anything like that, because it's so important, it's most important that we are in the presence of God. So we welcome you, Holy Spirit. We say, come, work your way amongst us. Lord, we confess our messiness, our brokenness. We know that there are times when we've stuffed up, and there are times when people have stuffed up and it's hurt us. And we come with all of that. And we cry, breath of God be in us. Breath of God, fill our lungs, fill our hearts, reveal Jesus to us. May we know the pleasure of the Father. God, it is so good to praise you, so good to honour you, so good to worship you. And just in that song before, in our praise and in our worship is how you move in us. You meet us in our messiness as we come and worship you, as we declare our praises and we honour you. You know us for who we are. Thank you that this is a safe place. We don't have to be anyone else. We can just be your child, your precious son, your precious daughter. And we're in family, we're friends. Thank you. Amen. Please do take a seat. Thank you, Lindsay. What a joy. What a joy it is to worship again. It is just, I know we have been in the summer in the playground and stuff like that, but it is. So, just so you're aware, so there's no surprises. I think this has been recorded. It's going to go on YouTube, so people who weren't feeling quite confident to come this morning can still get an opportunity to worship with us and to be part of the talk. So, Andy, anyone know who these are? Tim knows who they are. Who are they, Tim? I don't need the names. What are they collectively known as? Fimbles. That's right. Fimbles, for those who are a little bit older, they look a lot like wombles, but they've got a primary colour overdose. But Fimbles, their sole purpose in life is to find things. Now, they were a part of the childhood of our kids when they were very young, and because, like many families with small children, there are times when you need a thimble to find things that are lost. So in our cases, it wasn't toys or house keys or important pieces of paper, it was the kids themselves. So Molly and Callum are my twins. Callum is helping with the kids' work. Molly is here. And this story takes place when they were quite young, and we had just moved into farming. And we'd rented a house, and we'd managed to get all three children to the same school, which was amazing. Molly and Callum were just about to start in reception. And before you start reception, you have a home visit. You have someone who comes around. Their teacher usually comes around with their teaching assistant. And it was great. And of course, because we had twins, we had 2 teachers and 2 teaching assistants. Are you going to try and turn it off now?
No, I'm trying to move it so you're in the shop.
Oh, sorry. I thought if I moved this way, I'd be more in the shop.
No, we moved it whilst you were up there.
Okay.
Right, you can stay where you are, yeah.
Okay, fine. What's the momentum of the story now? Anyway, so we've got 2 teachers, 2 learning assistants, and Amber, of course, is a teacher, and so she was creating a very educational setting, you know, an opportunity really just to show that she knew what she was talking about. So there's all these very stimulating things that were out there on display. And so this troop of people come into our house, and we welcome them and say it's great, and they're looking around, they're very impressed, obviously. Where are the kids? The kids had gone off and hid. And so the ironic scenario is that we then spent the next 5 minutes, 6 of us, running around the house trying to find our own children. They, of course, were hidden behind a curtain or the sofa. The sofa, hidden behind the sofa, and we couldn't find them. Anyway, we did eventually find them. But I tell that story because we all know what it means to try and find things. If you've ever lost your mobile, do you know that panic? Yeah, you feel that sense of, where's my phone gone? Where's my phone gone? When you learn to drive and you suddenly got an emergency and you suddenly can't find your car keys. Equal sort of feeling. So we know what that feeling is. And we're going to start a little short series called Seek First His Kingdom. The title is taken from Matthew chapter 6 and comes from a teaching that Jesus gave about how people in different circumstances relate to God. He talks about poverty and issues of prayer and what we should do with our money and again the issue of worry. But the overall theme is about what do you put your security in? When your life is under fire, what confidence do you have in the direction of your life? Now, when I served as a pastor at Jubilee Church in Farnham, one of my fellow elders was a gentleman called Bob Pete. Bob used to serve in the army and was probably the most secure man I've ever met. He certainly had an inner confidence and an authority that must have been honed by his military experience. He was in bomb disposal and some of the other challenges that later he had to navigate in his life. Bob always had a wealth of wisdom to draw upon. I think this is why we so valued him as part of the team. One nugget of wisdom that he had that always stayed with me was his comparison between an iPad and a map when you're looking for directions. He said the iPad is great, but in his very real experience, when both are hit by a bullet, the iPad simply becomes a brick, whereas the map remains a map. Over the last 18 months, life has come under fire for us all. For many of us, the trajectory of normal life has suddenly changed, and that has become disorientating. I wonder, have you been holding an iPad or a map? In these moments, we need wisdom. Wisdom, as I often say, is the ability to do life with skill. And as Christians, the greatest repository of wisdom can be found in the Bible. Now, don't make the mistake of mixing information with wisdom. Information and knowledge are great, but wisdom requires action. Jesus said, whoever hears my teaching and does what I say will be like a... Come on. Basic people, here we go. Jesus said, okay, whoever hears my teaching and does what I say will be like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. Yeah? Yeah? Well done. Still some work to do. We can hear information, can't we? But wisdom requires doing something with what we have heard. So Jesus says, seek first his kingdom. When you feel under fire, disorientated, or even lost, seek first his kingdom. If you need security in life, seek first his kingdom. Just a quick and I hope a helpful definition of what his kingdom is. It's not simply heaven, okay? But I mean, it's partly that, but it's so much more. The kingdom of his kingdom is, I guess, a good definition would be God's reign through God's people over God's place. Let me repeat that. His kingdom is God's reign through God's people over God's place. Now, I'll unpack that later in the series, but for now, let's be aware that by first seeking his kingdom, we're on a trajectory towards God's reign through God's people over God's place. Now, I'm about to ask Bethan to come and read a passage, a familiar passage, which many of you would have heard before. And in it, you're going to hear information, but you will also find wisdom. And there are 4 people in this passage who get Jesus. And they begin to reorientate themselves to seek first his kingdom. So what I want you to do, whilst Bethan's reading it, is can you spot the 4 people? In doing so, they will reveal the answer to the question, who finds the kingdom? After all, the point of seeking is to find what you're looking for, isn't it? Bethan, Simon's got the microphone. It's by his leg.
Yes.
Two other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the king of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God," he said, "since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The death of Jesus. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 PM, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in 2. Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the woman who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching these things. The burial of Jesus. Now there was a man called Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man, who had not consented to their decision and action. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. Then he took it down, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The woman who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience with the commandment.
So in verse 34 we read this. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." It's a pivotal moment in the crucifixion drama, with Jesus from his position looking out over all the people and crying out to his Father. These people are watching, it says in verse 35, at what Jesus and the Father are doing. This planned work of salvation is finally coming to a head, and they just don't get it. The information has been heard, but who will respond? Gathered before Jesus on the cross are the rich and the powerful, as well as the weak and the poor. There are locals and foreigners, there are men and women. Most of the people look at this scene and reject Jesus and all that is going on. But some get it. Who gets it? So let's see if we can try and work this out. Who's the first person you think who gets it? Criminal. There we go. The thief on the cross. Now, the first person who gets it is a bad man. someone who is morally corrupt. The thief on the cross is so much more than a thief. You were not crucified for stealing. Crucifixion was for very serious crimes against the Roman Emperor, and we know from the Gospels that it was a very public punishment for people like Barabbas, for example, to make an example of them. So most likely the thief was a very notorious bad criminal. Please don't have a sort of scenario in your head where you're thinking there's a good thief and a bad thief. Okay, these are two reprehensible criminals. Yet one begins to get what is going on. He's a moral outsider, but he's beginning to get it. So who do you think the second person is? Centurion. That's right. Now, the second is someone who doesn't belong. Okay? He's a centurion, he's unclean, he's an unclean Gentile, he's someone who is outside of the people of God. Now, there's an interesting detail here. Luke in verse 47 says this, that of the centurion, he praised God. Now, Luke uses that phrase, and he only uses it 6 times in the Gospel. And every time he uses it, it's when someone suddenly sees the saving power of God in their lives. And so it's a little clue there that Luke is trying to wrap in there and reveal to us. That at this moment, this foreign Roman commander looks at this tragic situation unfolding around him. He looks at Jesus, and even though he is a cultural outsider, he is beginning to get it. So you've got a moral outsider, and you've got a cultural outsider. Now the third is a little bit of a trick question here, because the third is not an individual, but a group of people. The women. Kath said the women. See, when most of the male disciples have run into hiding, the women have stayed following Jesus right to the bitter end. In the Gospels, we're informed that almost every interaction that Jesus had with women is positive, well-meaning and transforming. And this is incredibly counter to the historical culture of the day, where women were the social outsiders. They were excluded from social power and marginalised. But they stayed. Despite being social outsiders, they got it. Now, isn't it interesting that the people responding are the outsiders? Be they moral outsiders, cultural outsiders, or social outsiders. And I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if you think of the parables or the stories of Jesus, you know, he told stories about Samaritans or the prodigal son, or when he had encounters, his encounters were with tax collectors and prostitutes. It's what we would expect, isn't it? We would expect the gospel to be for the outsiders. So it'd be wrong to assume, it wouldn't be wrong to assume, would it, that the gospel must be for these people, for those who are outside and marginalised. See, Jesus is always rejecting the rich and the respectable. He's always rejecting the religious, isn't he? He's always favouring the leper, the tax collector and the poor. And yet there's one more person who gets it. Joseph of Arimathea. And Joseph of Arimathea is a good man, a member of the religious council, a member of the Sanhedrin. He's someone who commands authority at the very centre of the culture of Israel. He's such a man of influence that he can go to Pilate and ask for Jesus' body. Don't think that that is a small thing. Well, that throws the pattern, doesn't it? That's not what we're expecting. Has Jesus gone off script? No, what we are witnessing is the secret to who finds the kingdom of God. It's not the type of person, be they outsider or insider. It's the grace shown to that person. You see, your moral performance doesn't matter. Your geographical location doesn't matter. The social tribes and cultures that you belong to don't matter. Your wealth doesn't matter. Your accomplishments and success or your lack of them. They don't matter. None of those things will earn you salvation, because Jesus' salvation is through grace alone. Now, I use the word salvation because the Bible describes it as the process of finding his kingdom. Jesus never receives an outsider simply because they're an outsider. He doesn't receive sufferers because they are sufferers. Nor does he exclude the rich and the powerful because they are rich and powerful. People come on the basis of grace and respond in faith, regardless of what they can and can't do. And yet it's a historical fact of generations past and a social fact of today that in general, women tend to get the gospel before men. People at the bottom of the social ladder get it before those at the top. And those with little power and influence get it before the privileged. Why do you think that is? Yeah? I think it's this. Because success in general, power in general, and accomplishment in general bring a spiritual blindness. And this is where we come back to the process of salvation. See, the founders of all the other religions overcame their enemies and then said, if you want salvation, then you do everything that I teach you to do with all your strength. That's how all the other religions will operate. Jesus is the only founder of a major religion who was killed by his enemies. Jesus brought salvation in weakness and vulnerability. He says you'll only be saved if you admit you are too weak to do his teaching. And that reveals the truth that you need a complete, gracious salvation. Christian salvation can only be received in weakness and repentance. And it's unlike any other religion. You can't earn it, you can't merit it, you can't win it. So it makes sense that in general, women tend to get it before men. People at the bottom tend to get it before those at the top. People with little power and influence get it before the privileged. Because people who understand weakness, vulnerability and exclusion get it faster. So, if you know you have moral weakness, you know you can't be good enough in your own strength, that's okay. Welcome to the family. If you've ever felt like you don't belong, that's okay. Welcome to the family. We have a Father who adopts us fully and completely. If you feel you don't matter, that your voice is not heard, know that you have a Father in heaven who loves you so much that he gave up the thing that was most precious to him to die for you. You are loved and so welcome. And if you're a person of influence, talented, wealthy, morally upright, privileged and powerful, welcome to the family. These things that you are, they're great blessings, but they don't really matter. To be honest, they just get in the way of the view. The wisdom is to see past them, to stop getting in the way of your view of Jesus. And if they are getting in the way, if they're blinding you to who Jesus is, there is a story about a rich young ruler that you might want to read. So the first thing to do, if you're feeling disorientated, and when your life is under fire, seek first his kingdom. Those who find God's kingdom are those that understand the grace of God. Those that understand this are wise because they know that we don't find his kingdom through our own merit, but only because of Jesus, who makes it possible through weakness and vulnerability. Wisdom, as I said earlier, is hearing information and then doing something about it. What can we do? Well, what did the four people that we picked out in this passage do? They responded to Jesus. That's what they did. They responded. Next week we're going to look at how we can seek the kingdom. But for now, why don't we prayerfully respond to Jesus? If you feel like an outsider because of what you don't have, or perhaps you're blinded by what you do have. Perhaps now is the time to respond to Jesus like the characters in the passage. Perhaps like the thief, it's time now just to put your life in Jesus' hands. Perhaps you're in a position like the centurion, where it's time to start asking questions about who God is. Perhaps your life is a bit like the women's, and it's time now for you to keep going, even in the most tragic of circumstances. Or perhaps it's like Joseph, who used his resources to make a difference. I've really enjoyed making short TV programs for the last 18 months. But what I've found is I've spent a lot of time giving information. As we come into the presence of God, we have an opportunity now to respond to what God is doing.